You can never actually learn how to direct until you direct, but you can study the great directors, you can understand the technique, you can watch directors as an actor, you can say, oh, if I ever get the chance, I am never going to do that. All of those things. And then when you finally start, I would also say to anybody who really, really wants to be maybe more than an actor, just build the work. Say, I'm going to go do this play and I'm going to rent the space or do whatever and I'm going to put it up. And I know it sounds a little Andy Hardy, Babes in Arms-ish, but if you build the project and learn from it, that's your grad school.
Yeah.
And as much as you can, create opportunities for yourself.
That was the voice of theater multi-hyphenate Lee Gundersheimer, and it is my absolute delight to have him on as the guest of this episode of the Page and Stage podcast, where we explore the art and craft of writing and performance. And as always, I'm your host, Jason Cannon. And this week, Lee and I talk about the power of reputation, the challenges and joys of reinventing yourself, and bulldozing your way into Uta Hagen's acting class. But before we get to all that, a brief Page and Stage plug. Now, this podcast is only one part of my story coaching work. You can check out everything I'm up to over at pageandstage.art, including my other podcast, 100 Plays, my weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, inspiration, and encouragement for storytellers of all stripes, as well as all of my coaching packages. So if you're working on a memoir, play, or speech, I cannot wait to hear your story. Again, that's pageandstage.art. Now, let me tell you a bit more about Lee Gundersheimer, and his whole entire bio is available over in the show notes. But I gotta tell you, I recorded with Lee a couple months ago and went on the 2-week Hyde Park Pack Michigan adventure. I was gone from my studio for a couple weeks up in Michigan with my beloved Rebecca and our pups and seeing all her family. And when I came back and started editing this episode, I'd forgotten just how much fun our conversation was. Yeah, Lee and I actually have very similar career paths, so you're going to hear us geeking out a little bit and enjoying how we got from acting to directing to playwriting to producing and everything else in between. Now, I never had the New York experience the way Lee did, and that's where I was really just fascinated. He worked with some of the biggest names in the business. He trained with Uta Hagen. One of his earliest gigs was working at Burt Reynolds' Dinner Theater, and he worked on stage alongside such people as Sally Field. So his story is just fascinating. And what I really appreciate about Lee is that his breadth of understanding of theater has resulted in an empathy and a willingness to collaborate that can sometimes get squashed out of us. We're in a very competitive business, right? And everyone's competing for audiences' attention. And sometimes that can lead us to take shortcuts or dent our authenticity. But Lee resists that. He's just an artist's artist. And he shares a lot of really great advice. So for anyone out there who's looking to be a better storyteller, better theater artist, I invite you to sit back, relax, and really enjoy this episode. Listen to what Lee has to share. I promise you, you're going to learn something. It's going to be worth your time. And I hope you also get to go check out his classes and his shows. The man works nonstop here in Sarasota. So yeah, here we go with my conversation with Lee Gundersheimer. I am online here with the one and only Lee Gundersheimer, and we're just zooming with each other across town here. Both of us rare. My Sarasota guests are few and far between, not by choice. Just kind of, I've been luck of the draw getting to meet all these people around the country. But Lee, you live not right down the road, but basically a few hop, skip, and a jump.
Yeah, a little higher. I'm in a burg they call Lakewood Ranch.
Yeah,
and we won't give any more details about that. That's for sure.
Lee, we are very similar in our career paths, and that's going to kind of lead our conversation today. The listeners and people who follow me at all know that act, direct, write, teach, coach, and you have a very similar vast array of skills in your Batman toolkit. So I want to talk about how we get to a point where you have so many different experiences and tools. But let's start at the beginning. Let's start with that moment where Lee Gundersheimer got bit by the theater bug. Everyone has that moment where the penny dropped. What is your theater storyteller origin story?
Well, it's interesting. I think it goes to second grade, but I can honestly say it may be earlier. I saw King Kong when I was a very, very little kid, the original, the old black and white. And I remember being terrified by that movie. I mean, terrified to this day. And so shadows in the room, I was sure was Kong coming to get me. But it also ignited this imagination in me to storytell. So I would do all of these things in my room to battle Kong and, put the pillows in certain ways and feel like the walls were coming in and all sorts of strange storytelling. And so that may be the actual beginning, but the first time I stepped on stage, I grew up in Miami, Florida, and it isn't a non-Jewish filled place, but the school that I went to, my family, I grew up Jewish. My family practiced, and then at a certain point, I became non-denominational. But in second grade, they knew I was one of the only Jewish kids in the class. So they created a role in the Christmas pageant called Mr. Gundersheimer. And I came out and told the story of Hanukkah. And I tried to do it in a very exciting and theatrical way, but it was basically just a monologue about what a menorah was and all of those things. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, not only am I typecast from an early age, but this is the beginning of my theater career. So I also thought, you could have cast me. I would have been happy to be the tree or anything. But no, I was Mr. Gundersheimer. And then I graduated to playing a tree in in the Clown Prince of Wanderlust, and finally grew to roles that but in high school we had a wonderful theater program, and I got to do Mr. Frank and Diary of Anne Frank. But I also was the only non-singing role in Man of La Mancha. I can't remember what his name is, but he's the head of the prison who comes in, not conspirator, but something, inquisitor.
Yes.
And he comes down the long, we built this 25-foot stairway that lowered down. And I remember I was the only one, I guess, that had the, gumption to want to climb down it every day. But by high school, I was severely bitten. And then I just knew I wanted to do it. And, I'm hoping your parents were the same way. I was blessed with parents who never even blinked when I made that choice. They just said, okay, it'll keep them off the streets if nothing else. I mean,
Right.
they were very supportive of that as a career choice and happily let me major in it. I went to Florida State, which was a big deal for me because I had never left Miami much. We had gone on trips, but I remember it snowed once at Florida State, and I was so excited because all I wanted was to own a sweater and get out of Miami. In Florida State, we had a pretty amazing group of people. Do you know who Alan Ball is?
Yeah.
Yeah, he
His
was in
directing
our
book is
class.
like, his directing
Yeah,
book's one of my favorites.
that's William Ball, I think. Alan Ball
You're right.
is the creator of 6 Feet Under and a bunch of other great. I mean, he's just a wonderful writer and director and producer. And Jay Smith Cameron was in our class, and Jay was on Succession. She was the lawyer on Succession, and she's just of a Broadway diva. She's done tons of incredible shows, and we had a bunch of other really cool people all in our class. But it was also the year that Burt Reynolds came through because he was an alumni
Right.
and decided he wanted to open the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theater down in Jupiter, Florida. So he auditioned a bunch of us, and I was lucky enough to be the inaugural group of kids. We were really still kids to be apprentices at the Burt Reynolds. And Ann Morrison, who I know you know, who's one of Sarasota's finest actresses and is now doing the national tour of Kimberly Akimbo. She was one of the apprentices along with me. And so we got to know each other, and that's been a wonderful relationship for lifelong. Just a great person to touch base with. But at the Burt Reynolds, I got to work with people. I don't know if you've had this luck yet. I worked with people that were huge celebrities, and I was 20. So what was great about that was, and I'm not trying to name drop,
No, go ahead. Name drop. I was going to ask you. I saw it in your bios. You go ahead and name drop all
It
you want.
it taught me what it taught me was they're phenomenal. If you do your work well, you can hold your own with them, and they want you to. And they're just people with a bunch of foibles and messy lives as anyone. I mean, there was so much interesting drama off stage with all of these folks. And that was a wonderful thing to understand at a very early age, that fame does come with this, amazing talent and charisma, and it's fun to work with these people, but they're also just, they're looking for their next paycheck and doing their own thing and have as many insecurities and wonderful traits as anyone else. So that was a really cool lesson. But I got to work with Bert and Sally Field. Sally Field was at that time his girlfriend or steady. They never married, I don't think. It was also the breakup of that relationship while I was there, and then the Lonnie Anderson, you know. But I never worked with her. I did get to work with Martin Sheen and both of his sons who had never been on stage yet, Charlie and Emilio, and they were on stage for the first time. I got to work with Carol Burnett, which was, my gosh. And then there were so many other people, Karen Valentine, people that were at that time big deals. But to get to work with them before you're even 21 is pretty cool. And then I raced to New York. Then it was as fast as I could get to New York. And I was in New York at the same time that Annie got her big break doing the Sondheim show. And that was also an eye-opening moment because I was so happy and jealous of her at the same time for getting to do this amazing experience. But then it didn't go well. It was not a hit and I felt terrible. But that was also a really kind of eye-opening moment of, okay, you can actually get your dream come true. And it doesn't mean that it's actually going to catapult you.
Right.
So
A lot in there. So first I need to start with this. Back in your Christmas pageant days, what a lovely attempt on their part to weave you in, but weren't all those characters Jewish anyway, originally? Right? Aren't Mary and Joseph and Jesus Jewish?
now, let's not quibble. I think it was more because they knew that there were some kids that were going to be lighting menorahs, and how could we work that in? But yes, I guess I could have come out and said, oh, by the way, but no, that was not what was scripted for me to do.
Oh my goodness. All right, so working with all these big name stars and you're 20 and
Uh-huh,
21.
uh-huh.
Without talking out of pocket, I'm curious, like you said, to meet them as humans and as co-stars. Do you remember looking back and thinking
Trust,
about
trust me, they were never co-stars, even though I did get to work. I mean, I was always the apprentice. So I don't want to ever make it seem like, oh yeah, I had palled around, I didn't, but I got to actually work with and say lines with some of these amazing people.
yeah, great. What's something that maybe you learned from being on stage with them or watching them, like as a 2021 year old who's been through, you're going through the school part of it, which can be very theoretical, but people like this who've made it and they come and they're doing these shows, what are some practical things you might have picked up, say, from a Sally Field or someone like that?
Well, first, that your reputation is gold, and that there is a certain amount of openness to bond with, but then that's it. I'm still this person and don't go there. And so I understood boundaries pretty quickly.
Mm.
And I understood that you could be very cordial and friendly, but you were not going to say, let's go get a burger. I mean, that just didn't happen. There was also a sense, honestly, a sense of, oh my gosh, they can just walk out and everybody will, eat out of their hands. But they are really just doing their work and they're doing their work well. But they're not magical. They're not some sort of, unobtainable level of accomplishment that you can't. They seemed pretty, they're no different than you, Jason. They just happened to have a career going and they found a way to keep it going and could make it work. Burnett was the most down to earth and
Mm.
humble and real person. She was kind and generous, and she had just gone through a pretty tragic thing with one of her children, and she was not, so she was a little guarded, but she couldn't have been more joyful to know. You understand why her career has lasted as long as it has, because she's a genuinely decent and wonderful human being.
Yeah.
And many of them were, and some of them weren't, which is what was so interesting. But you just sort of, you find that as you move along in your career in different degrees. I mean, no one has to be famous to be a jerk,
Right.
and no one has to be famous to be amazing. So that was the biggest thing. Now, I was still a little too green to understand acting technique yet. So it's not like I sat down and said, "Can you teach me how to be better?" I mean, we had some classes, but they were never really technique oriented. That happened when I ran to New York, and I just bullied my way into Uta Hagen's class. And I say that because I had no idea how important she was, except that I had read her book and wanted to study with her. And so I just said, I'm auditioning and I'm going to make this. And I did. And that was pretty rare. I mean, people didn't really get into her class as easily as somehow I did get in. And I guess they needed tall guys at that point for something. But that was probably the single most pivotal moment in my career. I mean, that's when I learned, oh my gosh, there really is a technique. You really can do this. It does make total sense, and it's served me so well. I teach that technique when I teach. And even though I saw her do some things, and even to me, she reamed me out one day for not rehearsing well enough, and she was right. But she could be very vicious in a very wonderful teacherly way, but she did not suffer fools, and she let you know it. But she was also, I've never met a more dedicated instructor. And my mother was a teacher, so for 20 something or almost 30 years. But Uta Hagen took teaching to a level of total respect and decency, and she was phenomenal.
Great. So a lot of people who check in with what I'm doing here with storytelling, they are also fellow practitioners like you and I. But a lot of them are enthusiasts or audience members who want to peek behind the curtain. So when you talk about Uta Hagen's technique, a lot of people listening probably, you and I, we know that
Yeah,
shorthand, but can you give us like the nutshell version of what Uta Hagen's acting technique is?
sure. First, let me just say there were about four or five great acting teachers of the 20th century. Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, Sanford Meisner, and Uta Hagen. They were like the top four.
Mount
And
Rushmore.
they all admired and respected each other, but they all had slight differences. And Uda's difference was, and she defined it by two great actresses of their early 20th century that she was lucky enough to have seen, Sarah Bernhardt and Eleanor Duse. And she said Sarah Bernhardt was known, she was sort of like who would be a good example? Like the Madonna of her day or the Lady Gaga of her day, although Lady Gaga's gone on to do a lot more. As a performer, all she had to do is come out and be on stage, and everybody was enraptured. They were just, oh my God, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And she knew how to work an audience rather than use herself and dive into any kind of inner reality. She played them like a violin. And when she was finished, everybody would stand and applaud and just be gaga. I saw Sarah Bernhardt. She was amazing. And there are still some actors like that to this day that work in what we say as from the outside in. And it's all about outer technique. And Eleanor Duse was exactly the opposite. She literally just walked out and lived and breathed her work as a real person on stage. And it was never flashy and it was never flowery, but it was devastatingly relatable. And I'm pretty sure the other best way to say this is when Dusa finished, no one stood and applauded for about 10 or 15 seconds because they were so deeply moved. Then they did.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that Tom Stoppard stole that from Shakespeare for Shakespeare in Love, because he definitely has that moment in Shakespeare in Love where the play finishes and
Yeah.
everybody's worried it was a flop, and it's because no one can move. It was so good.
Yeah.
And then they stand and applaud. And So that's a long-winded way of saying Uta's technique is that you use what is valuable from your life and your own personal Rolodex to inhabit the life of the character, but you look for the absolute truth of the moment-to-moment acting. You don't do anything for effect. And that, how many times in real life have you said, if you put that on stage, no one will believe it, and it's from real life? That's the kind of work that you are looking to try to create, rather than the choreography of something that will amaze you.
That's a great boil down right there. Thank you, Lee.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you run to New York, you bully your way into Uta Hagen's class. So you're kind of acting first at this point, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
the acting angle. But you've now since then become, you're a director, a playwright, you've been an artistic director, a managing director, a producer, a teacher. What kind of exploded all these hats and hyphens for you? I know for me, part of it was opportunity. Part of it was I literally did not want to wait tables. I would take any theater job. I didn't want to be a temp. I didn't want to do anything that wasn't theater related. So I would do everything theater related. One of my first jobs at the big stages in St. Louis, one of the biggest musical theaters in St. Louis, my first job there was I got paid $40 to help them strike a set. But I showed up and showed my face and shook their hands and said, "Hey, when are auditions?" Right? And just you put in the time, you make the contact. So when I went in for my first audition with them, they're like, "Oh, Jason." Right? And did striking the set get me the job? No, I had to also do the work and be prepared and be good enough. But I just refused to do anything but theater. So I would do everything theater. And I kind of became this multi-hyphenate. It wasn't a plan. It just was by accident. And I wonder what your journey towards wearing all these hats, if that's similar or different.
Accident and necessity, yeah. And my way of saying that is, not only did they not, you had to prove that you could do it, but you were Jason already to them. So you were not just an actor that they didn't know, and they had admired your work ethic or something about you already. And my phrase about that, and this, I might have learned this, I either learned it from Uta or she reinforced it, but it may have been as far back as the Burt Reynolds, work breeds work. So if you can get you, and there's that line in Hamilton that's now famous, I want to be in the room where it happens.
Yeah.
If you can be around the people that are doing what they're doing, you will eventually be in the room at the right place when they go, "Oh, does Lee act?" Or, "Oh, can Lee," and then it's up to you to be good at what you can be good at and be the best that you can be, because Burt Reynolds told this. I just told this story back to Annie the other day. I said, remember to use this when you're out on the road. Burt Reynolds, one story that's stuck with me the most. They offered him Rawhide, his first big break. And they said, but we need to know, because there's going to be an awful lot of horseback riding. Can you ride a horse? And he said, like the wind. And then he went out and learned how to ride a horse.
Right, he'd never been on before.
No. So, like the wind is become a mantra of mine. You just, oh, can you do? Absolutely. And then go learn, or already have done the work. The one thing I will say is, and I think you're probably like this, a voracious reader, student, learner, take in as much as you can. You can never actually learn how to direct until you direct. But you can study the great directors, you can understand the technique, you can watch directors as an actor, you can say, oh, if I ever get the chance, I am never going to do that. All of those things. And then when you finally start, I would also say to anybody who really, really wants to be maybe more than an actor, just build the work. Say, I'm going to go do this play, and I'm going to rent the space or do whatever, and I'm going to put it up. And I know it sounds a little Andy Hardy, Babes in Arms-ish, but if you build the project and learn from it, that's your grad school.
Yeah.
And as much as you can, create opportunities for yourself. So to that end, a bunch of people from Uta's class, we built a theater. And we built a theater on the Upper West Side of Manhattan before we realized how dumb that was. And none of us could do the books and all of the nitty gritty. But we just said, we're going to sign a lease. And oh my God, we have a theater now. We better get some lights and put on a play. And we did. And I had an amazing partner who has long since passed away. Her name was Hilary Six. And she We were co-artistic directors of this space called Avalon Repertory Theater, and we believed in rep. We believed that you could have a group of actors, and if you're loyal to them, and a group of writers and a group of directors, they will stay and work with you while they're not out doing much higher paying glory filled jobs. And it lasted for about 4 or 5 years until the rent quadrupled because it was upper West Side, and it hadn't hit its peak in terms of value. But that was such a great learning experience, and then from there everything else flowed. But I got a chance to write, to direct, to produce, to do all sorts of things, and to perform. And I still am friends with some of those actors. They're still in my life, and we remember those years with a lot of joy.
Yeah. Oh, man, it's the parallel. So the way you just said it, like, go put on a show, right?
Hmm.
My other podcast, 100 Plays, I talk about this in the first episode. I had been wanting to direct in St. Louis. I was a punk kid. No one knew, I was just an actor. But like you said, I was watching. Like I could, Deanna, Bill, all these people that I was under that I would like, that's amazing. That's amazing. Oh, what she just did there is amazing. And it was literally like what you said. I maxed out a credit card and rented a space and put on Who's Afraid Virginia Woolf. And
Oh my God, you didn't start with something easy.
nope. Like you said, you don't know what you don't know. But
Did you direct it,
I
or were you
directed and designed, and then I hired the best actors I could find. I mean, I went to the
Oh
best
my
actors I could
God.
find who are non-equity, and because the parts are so good, to your point, they were like,
Mm.
have you produced before? No. You're directing?
Yeah,
Yeah. I get
yeah,
to
but
play
it's more
George?
than
Yeah. But that became the calling card, literally. A few weeks after that show closed, I got a call from another theater saying, "Hey, come do No Exit." You never know until you put it out there.
same play.
Yeah,
Same play.
in its own weird way, yeah. Hell is other people all the way.
Yeah, work breeds work. I'm telling you. As
Yeah,
long as you're good,
yeah,
as long as you don't screw it up.
yeah,
But even then, you learn from it.
yeah. I just saw a quote today. I never lose. I win or I learn. Right? Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, so you are out of necessity because that's what I love that you said that. So you start this theater, Upper West Side, and like you
Hmm.
said, within 4 years you have written, you've directed, you've cleaned the toilets, you've run the box office, you've built this,
Oh
you've built
yeah.
sets, you got good with a screw gun, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm having flashbacks.
Hmm.
So you kind of end up trying out all these hats because someone had to do it. You signed the lease, right? You jumped
Hmm.
in face first, both feet, pick your metaphor.
Blackmail yourself into being brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So that has its 4 or 5 year run. Were you also gigging on the side, or once that kind
Yeah,
of
of
closed
course.
down, where did you go
Absolutely.
next?
No, even while I was doing that, what it's like when you're young, you have no idea of how many hours you're actually working.
Yeah.
I was also managing a video store on the Upper West Side and doing that at the same time. So I was working, probably 120 hours a week. When that theater ended, a woman who was Harold Clurman's widow, um, who had dabbled with a lot of real estate on the Upper East Side, decided she wanted to build an off-Broadway theater. And she knew I had built this theater, so she invited me to come and help her build this off-Broadway theater. And it became the Century Center for the Performing Arts. It was a really beautiful, 499 seat off-Broadway theater. A couple things that I learned so intensely from this situation: someone tells you who they are pretty early on, and you'll be able to enjoy the experience for a little while, but look out. And she decided she was going to sell the theater after she had built it 4 or 5 years into. She was bored and she was moving on to her next venture, and it became a religious broadcasting space instead of this beautiful off-Broadway theater that had won a couple Pulitzer Prizes with the things that ran there. How I Learned to Drive ran there in a commercial run, and so did Three Tall Women and the play about the baby. I mean, it was a beautiful theater. The other thing that it taught me was that when people create stuff, they aren't always there. They have the means, but not the know-how sometimes. I remember sitting in in a meeting with the top architect, one of the top architects in New York, who had never built a theater, and they had forgotten to run power backstage for the dimmers. So there literally was oh, we need to have power back there. And you just went, and there was a theater consultant on this job that obviously had not been consulted. And so they quickly decided they better get on with the theater consultant and do more work. Now, that architect went on to do the renovation of Grand Central and many other amazing, I mean, they're a top-notch architect in New York, but that was their first theater. And so again, it's so interesting to watch people learn on the job and to say, oh my God, you can be one of the best at your work, but not at all work, you know? And that was again a wonderful eye-opening moment for me. It was a really cool space. It was beautiful. And it's a shame it's not there anymore. It was right across the street from the Vineyard in Union Square, and right down the street from where Delaguardo ran for years in that big open bank space that Daryl Roth opened.
Yeah, that's where I
Yeah.
was last summer with my off-Broadway show right there.
Yeah, you were in Daryl Roth Theater, I
In the
think.
DR.
The little, yeah, yeah. That was literally next door to our space,
Wow.
which is now, yeah.
That's for the theater world is so small. It's so
Yeah,
tight.
yeah.
Everybody's like, it's not 6 degrees of separation. It's like 3.
Again, that's like what I said, though. Your reputation is so important because everybody's going to talk. You know, theater people here. Everybody talks about everybody and everybody, you know. So the thing is, you just have to be open to wanting to do good work and hope that people believe in what you do.
Yeah. So as you started adding the hyphens,
Hmm.
did you have, like, people ask me all the time, like, what's your favorite thing to do? Like, or if you could only do one for the rest of your career, what would it be? I used to really
And
quickly, easily say directing, but at this point, I'm kind of like, I'm not sure because each one requires a different energetic output, and each one fills me in a different way. And I've gotten to the point where I don't really understand being a single use artist, if that makes sense.
I absolutely, it does. My way of answering that question is always, would you want the same dessert every single night? Because as much as I like chocolate cake, I don't know that I would want it every single time I am having dessert. Or even what's your favorite meal every day, you know? So I always say they each bring out a different joy and a different of my artistic vision. And so I wouldn't want to do one of them only the rest of my life. And every time I'm directing, I'll say, okay, I don't need to do this again. Let me go back to writing. Because, you know, there's always the frustration of, oh my God, is it going to work? But you feel the same thing about a play you write. And I started a play today, literally this afternoon, and said, okay, here you go. You're going to be in this world for a little while. Thankfully, it's going to probably be short. But it definitely uses a different mind space than the others. The one thing I will say, and you're not there yet, Jason, but you'll see it eventually, is as a performer, do the bucket list big roles now as much
Huh.
as you can, because it is so much harder to put that in your brain and keep it there. The older you get, it just is. And like I was so pleased that Catherine Tanner gave me the part of Rothko in Red
Rothko,
because
that's
it's
right.
just one of the most amazing parts ever written for a sort of chubby guy. And but it was tough to put all those words in my head at this point. So I have decided, you know, the parts I really want to do, I'm going to go after them now while I still can, because it is tough, man.
What are I'm a producer too. What are those parts, Lee? What are those? What are your remaining bucket list
God,
parts?
come on. We don't have enough time. You know, I'd love to play Willy Loman once. I'd love to do the Crucible once.
Mm.
And it sounds like I'm Arthur Miller centric, and I'm not. Those are just the two things that come to mind right away. I'm trying to think. I haven't gotten to do enough Shakespeare. I was a managing director of a Shakespeare festival, but I've only gotten to direct, and I've very rarely acted in Shakespeare. So any of the great roles in Shakespeare that I could still do, I would be thrilled to do. I would also love to do all of the major Chekhov plays again before. I mean, and there are some Tom Stoppard plays that I would, able to do. But, whatever comes, I'll take
Yeah.
it.
Someone recently asked me this exact question. I'm forgetting the exact context, but I remember that I had a moment of like, I'm in a place where I've sort of released the actor bucket list. Like, and what I'm honestly most interested in at this point is like if it's the exact right project with the exact right people, especially if it's a new play, right? That's kind of
Hmm.
where my guts are right now. Is and
I'm going to send,
a lot of my work recently has been in the memoir space, in the true
right.
lived experience space, turning true stories into theater. That's been the majority of my work the last 3 years, and my teaching too. Like of course, like it used to be that Cyrano was like my ultimate bucket list role, right? That's not gonna happen.
You can still do Cyrano.
I got a few years left, but no, I also just like to your point too, the rigors of the actor's schedule. Like I'm also at a point like I don't want to do 8 shows a week for 4 months. So and it's just like I want to be home with Rebecca and the dogs, and I have other things I'm doing, and it's just the grind of that. I think a lot of people don't realize just what a grind. Oh, you're only working 4 or 5 hours a day. I mean, it
Yeah.
is a grind, and because the job also is complete giving, right? You have to empty yourself out every night, nothing held back, and to
And
replenish.
And then you come home with the high of having done that, and you can't go to sleep at a normal hour. You're up for another 2 or 3 hours.
Yep.
Yeah, people don't understand. I've got a play I want to send you because there are very few people in this area that could do one of these parts, and you'd be great. So I'm sending you one just for you to say, okay, I
Well,
could see at
cool.
least doing a reading of this play. It
Everyone,
takes
you
place
heard.
in the Tower of London, but although it's not the Tower of London, it's a fictional version, and it's a guard who is guarding a queen who has been imprisoned by the king because he wants to move on and marry someone else. And it's a real, and it's in, do you know Christopher Fry's work?
Oh
It's
yeah.
in, it's in a sort of pseudo verse, but it's not pretentious at all in that way. It's not like trying to be Moliere or something,
Right.
but it just is heightened language and like Christopher Fry. And I think you'd be great in it. So there are very few actors that can handle the language that can also have a sense of humor and all the other stuff that it kind of needs.
Well,
So I'll send
everyone,
it to you.
yeah, yeah. And if there's anyone listening who wants to underwrite a developmental workshop,
There we go.
I'll put Lee's email in the show notes.
We'll make it happen.
Fantastic. What was the first show you directed, Lee? Was it one of the new plays at that theater you built, or was it in school, or?
I'm just saying it because it was a favorite production of mine. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest we did there, and that was just a total joy. So if that wasn't one of the first, it definitely sticks to mind. There was also a new play called A Gathering of Nettles that was about these three eccentric women in an Okeechobee swamp. That was a new play by a new writer, and we were really excited that went on to be done at the WPA Theater. So I was excited to work on that. But I think we did a showcase of one acts first, just to get everybody involved. But we did
Yeah.
so many plays, I don't know which one was first. And I don't even remember it. Before we had a theater, the people that built the theater and I did two things. We did a production, I directed a production of mine called Can't Dance that takes place in a disco in the Hamptons. But that was the second play. The first play we did was by Edna St. Vincent Millay, and it's called Aria da Capo, and it's a takeoff on Commedia dell'arte.
Okay.
And we did that. That was a vehicle for Hillary, the woman who I co-artistic directed with. And I think that might have been first. And we did that at a small space, down in somewhere in lower Manhattan. And that made us go, we can do this. Let's build a theater. And that's what we did.
Let me ask you this, because I remember I went through this when I got to the other side of the table and I went from auditioning to watching auditions. And you have that moment where you're watching 100 people in a day and you go, that's what I was doing wrong all those years. So when you started directing, how did it impact you as an actor?
Exactly that. I mean, I knew all the things that I had been doing wrong, from the I'm acting, and all the, And also don't choose the material that they've seen. Don't choose the material that they're like, oh, here we go again. Find something interesting, new, and exciting to them. Make sure it goes on a journey. Don't try to be the best thing they've ever seen. Just try to be good and truthful and real. Because if you overdo it, it's just as bad as underdoing it. There were all sorts of lessons, but the most important was to really relish the chance to audition, because I don't remember who the first person that told me this is. It's your opening and closing night. Just think of it that way.
Oh,
It is the chance to walk in that door, especially with new material. And I'm doing it. I'm doing this play, and you're crazy if you don't give it to me, because look at this. This is what I can do with it. And then you're never going to know the reasons you don't get it. You've been in the room too, where you were fighting for one person and somebody says, nope, I'm sorry, we've worked with that person. You're not working with it, or whatever the reason. And then you get talked out of using the person that you most really wanted to use. So you never know why people cast the way they do. The hardest thing, and I'm sure this has happened to you, is there was somebody you thought you were going to use, and they're a good colleague and friend, and then somebody comes in and blows you away, and you're like, holy shit, now I have to tell this person I'm not using them. And it's just, there was somebody that was in what, for whatever reason, seemed like it would be a better choice. So if you've had to do that, people have had to do that with you. And you just can't take it personally. Of course it hurts like hell, and you're like, and like every other actor, well, I would have done it 50 to, all that stuff. But you realize that it's a gift to get a chance to even be in the room and do it. And that's the important thing to. When I taught audition, I would say that quite often to my students, that first of all, don't be late, don't rush, give yourself time, show up prepared, make sure you know it left and right. Don't ever under prepare for an audition. And I know life takes over and things can happen, but just have a work ethic that is unstoppable, and that will pay off.
yeah. When I teach auditioning too, I always talk about how your goal isn't to book it. Your goal is to leave an impression. Because to your point, you don't know what they're really looking for, and the best directors, honestly, leave themselves open to being surprised. They don't even know what they're looking for until they see it sometimes. So to
Mm-hmm.
take it personally, that's your choice. It's never personal unless you make it personal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, I mean, I remember once I got one of my first big roles in St. Louis. It was Comedy of Errors, right? So one of the reasons I got Antipholus of Syracuse is because there was another 6-foot guy with dark hair who looked just enough like me that we could pretend to be twins. And, yes, I was also good enough, but if I hadn't been, they would have gone with 2 other twins. I would have screwed John, right?
And thank God John was good.
Right, exactly. He could have screwed me.
Yeah.
I remember once a director walked a bunch of us in because he wanted to see various heights and do they look like they're married? Do they look like brother and sister? He was looking for that familial unit feeling. And so much is beyond your control when it comes to why casting happens the way it does. That if you go in with like an attitude, or the only way it's ever personal is if you make it personal.
The other thing that happens, which I always want to make sure that people understand, is sometimes the directors aren't really that good and or professional themselves. And I had a director who was eating through an entire audition once. And, you go, there's nothing you're going to do to tell that guy how rude it is for you to be not wanting to pay attention and eat your lunch in the middle of my work. But okay, that's who you are.
Man. Let me ask you another kind of process question, Lee, because I teach writing a lot too. And especially first time or early career playwrights, they try to direct from the page. You see it most in their adverbs, in the adverbial stage directions, slowly or malignantly or with, they're trying to.
Pause.
Oh my God, so many pauses.
Yeah.
Pinter knew what he was doing, but most of us don't.
I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Pinter started to be a parody of himself. I'm sorry. But like Hammett.
As a playwright now, obviously I do tell my writers, you do need to think, you're not writing an essay, you're not writing fiction, you're writing for the stage. So you do need to think three-dimensionally. Yeah. It's based in dialogue, behavior, and the three-dimensional world. but you can't direct from the playwright's chair, right? That you
Mhm.
actually squash collaboration. Now, as someone who's also an actor and director, and I think probably as an actor, sometimes you're in a room going, "Ooh, I would have staged that differently." But as a playwright, when you just said you started a play today, does writing a play engage your actor or director brain? Do you cast
Oh,
yourself in the
sure.
roles? Like when I direct a
Oh,
play,
sure.
sometimes there's the brilliant one-man version in my head.
Of course. What's interesting I've found is, especially if you're really cooking, you forget the actor part of your brain for a little while and you're in the storyteller part of your brain. And the storyteller part of your brain is almost always more successful because that's the one that's really weaving at something that can't be stopped. But then you stop and you go back and reread, and then you start to go, okay, as an actor, that really isn't the way if I say it like this, it's so much meatier, and then that part of your brain starts to kick in. And then the director part of your brain goes, time out, guys. What about the. So again, if you've developed each of those skills, I think they only enhance each other, and certainly when you're writing, they do. But I'm always amazed when you're working on a play. Uta used to say, cross out all the stage directions, especially the ones that were about, because she said there's the stage manager's notes from the original production, most of them,
Right.
and they're not the actors, I mean, the playwright's intention. When they are the playwright's intention, if you look at the line, you're going to do it the way it says to do it almost all the time because the character is wanting what the character is wanting. But if it says angrily, she would say, wait a minute now, I've been in fights with very passive aggressive people that their anger is very different than yelling. And you can be incredibly angry and almost laugh. And so she used to say, be very wary of those notes that are telling you exactly how to do it. And I trusted her because she was, doing incredible parts, and doing them so well.
Yeah. Adverbs, man. I hate adverbs. So I want to get back to your timeline a little bit here.
Uh-huh.
How did you, so you did the New York thing for a while. Why did you leave New York? Where did you go next? And what precipitated you leaving the place you had run to?
I worked for 10 years at NYU too, at the same time that I was running a couple or doing a couple other important theater things. But I was the industry liaison at NYU, and that job, I had an amazing boss, an amazing artistic director. And then they brought in a new artistic director when he retired, who I championed, by the way. And within 2 months, they fired me. And I had been there a decade. And they fired me because she wanted to bring in someone who she really wanted from her old job. And it was all political and. But I remember thinking, one, wow, this is very much like the firing scene in Death of a Salesman, where you just can't believe it. Because I had no warning of this at all, no idea that it was happening. And I had just gotten superlative reviews and things like that. But that made me go, okay, you've been in New York your entire adult life. You're now going to either have to reinvent yourself to stay here. I had also just lost my wife about 6 months before that to cancer. And so I was a single, widowed, whatever I was, 49 or whatever I was, theater artist, gonna have to reinvent myself in New York. And I thought, you should just go try somewhere else. You've never gone anywhere else. You've just been here. I mean, I had done some regional directing and things, but I hadn't lived anywhere. And a job opened up in, of all places, Duluth, Minnesota. And I thought, you can't get any more different.
Yeah.
I remember being in Riverside Park with our dogs, the dog friendly group of people that go every morning to run their dogs in the park, and saying, so guys, what do you think of Duluth? And to a person, everybody would go, Minnesota? Duluth, Minnesota?
Jeez.
Wasn't Bob Dylan from there? They like nobody knew anything more about it. And I thought, this could be a cool place to reinvent yourself. And I went there and applied for this. And again, this is how naive I am. I don't know if you do this, Jason. You're probably a better planner than me, like moving to Sarasota to run a theater and then, you know. But I didn't even realize it was only a visiting professorship. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't know it. I was just, go do it. What the heck? Thankfully, I didn't get rid of my apartment yet, but I went to do this visiting professorship, and I remember going to the interview and getting off the plane, and there were 8 guys in camo and hunting rifles and, like the Midwest cliche. And I thought, you're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. Okay, here we
Yeah.
go. I had not seen hunters, I don't think ever, and I really ended up loving Duluth. It was a beautiful and interesting Minnesota. I stayed in Minnesota 8 years. It's a really interesting state. It breaks the cliche mold all the time in sort of interesting ways, as you know, from what's happened tragically recently. But it has a huge, vibrant art scene no matter where you go. The state funds the arts. It's like you were saying with the Midwest, you're surprised at how many states give incredible support for the arts. And so I ended up in Duluth to sort of rebuild my life and take a moment and see what I wanted to do as a got to direct 2 incredible shows at that university, but even more so 4 or 5 amazing shows, including musicals, which I had never been given the joy to direct in their larger theaters in Duluth. And it has a very vibrant art scene. And I got to, even before I showed up, I had auditioned by video. That was the earliest video audition I had ever done because it was like so new. And got to be in Tracy Letts' Bug at a small theater. And, I mean, to get to work on a Tracy Letts play, I'll do that any day. And so I was starting to get, almost in its own way, more work outside of New York than in New York, and started to fall in love with it. And milk isn't $6, you can. So I was like, wow. And you could, go into the woods and, see waterfalls and be out in the things that you wouldn't have done if you were living in New York City the rest of your life. So I'm in no hurry to ever really go back to live in New York now that I'm outside of it. And
Right.
I never would have said that, I would have thought. I mean,
Right.
I was the kind of person that I would go visit people outside of New York and go, get me back. I just want it, and I'd fly back over and fall madly in love with the city every time. I was worse than Woody Allen. But I'm not there ever really anymore. When I go back, I go, oh, I don't miss, and I certainly don't miss the price of theater there now. It's
Right.
just obscene. So,
We're getting here close to time, so I'm going to pivot into our wrap
hmm
up. I mean, we could just jam forever, and I
hmm
mean, might have to go again and share more of these like little things that we've learned through the weird course of our completely unpredictable careers. But I'm going to pivot into the spotlight. So I got a couple questions. What is your favorite story that you're currently reading or watching?
I just watched one last night. Now, favorite, I can't swear, but I just watched, and I can't say her name right. Hardigay, Maritza,
Mariska
or how do you,
Hargitay, yeah.
Marishka Hardigay. How do you say it?
I thought it was Hargitay. I thought it was like, oh man. We're both,
See?
hopefully,
Anyway,
I'll edit it.
no, leave in that I can't because that's also part of what is so amazing about it.
Mariska Hargitay.
There you go. I'm not even going to try. Her documentary, My Mother Jane.
About her mom, right.
My Lord, watch it. It is not only a beautiful tribute, but it's also raw and full. It's more about her. And I don't think she thought that that's what it was going to be like. And then I can't tell you, but it has these amazing plot twists as you're watching it, and you're like, it's a documentary with as good a plot as anything I've seen in a long time. I mean, trust me on this.
All right.
It could have been scripted. It's
Wow.
that good, and it's beautiful, and her humanity is profound. It's a really beautiful work of art, and it transcends documentary. It transcends all sorts of labels. It's just great.
Great. I will put a link in the show
Yeah.
notes. I've been hearing about it, so
Oh,
that's another great. Yeah.
it's really good.
All right. Next question. If you could ask any one person any one question, who would that person be, and what would you ask them?
It's so selfish. The thing that came to mind right away is I would like to ask Shakespeare, did you really write the play? Because I'm not convinced the guy named Shakespeare was the guy that wrote the play. And I actually worked, we could talk a whole lot about this, but I worked for a long time with a man who was convinced that it was not only a woman, but it was an African descent woman who was an actual published poet of the time. You can read about it. Dark Lady of the Sonnets is I think the book that he tried to write about it. But we were making a documentary about it, and he convinced me that there was an awful lot of interesting people, including Mark Rylance, who believed that Shakespeare might not have been Shakespeare. And there's all sorts of reasons, and I won't bore you at the end of a wrap down, but like we only have signatures that are misspelled. We don't have a single piece of handwriting and we have handwriting of all the other major writers of the period. There are all sorts of reasons. But they can never figure out timeline-wise who would be or who could have been. So there's all these theories about that it's a conglomeration of people. But his theory is that it's this one person, and it actually, Lanier is her name. And I would just love to ask Shakespeare, did you really do it? Yes, that would be. And it's selfish because there are much better, profound humanists and people that it would be great to talk to. But
No,
that's what came to mind.
that's a big one. I'm so curious if that's one of those things we'll
Can
just
you
never
imagine?
know, or
Can you imagine if the greatest writer ever was a black woman? How that would freak all of these scholars out to
yeah,
no end. It'd
yeah.
be so
Man,
cool.
I've done a little bit of digging. The most obvious one is Sir Francis Bacon. Is the most obvious
Hmm.
plug and play. But yeah, the what's interesting is that the case against keeps getting stronger, but the case for someone is still just you have to
Exactly.
you almost get into, like down to wormhole conspiracy theory if you go too far. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it'd be nice to know.
Yeah. Someday somebody's going to crack it with finding something, hopefully, but nobody's been able to.
Yeah. All right. Next question. What is the best advice that you have ever taken?
Not to answer questions. No, best advice I've ever taken. Show up. There was a job that I didn't almost go for because I had this or that, or the train would be, whatever. And because I went, and I remember a teacher saying, just show up. I made more money that year from that one job than I made all the rest of my career in New York. And I almost didn't go.
Mm,
And that was really stupid. So I would say just show up.
just show up. Yeah. My version of that, when like acting apprentices or people starting out come to me with like, should I take this show or that show, or how did that? And there's a lot of angst around, should I audition for this or not? I always say, look, knock on every door. Don't make a decision until you see which one's even open. Right? It's another version of what you just said. Is show
You
up to
should be
everything.
so lucky.
Yeah.
You should be a quandary of which should I
Right.
take.
Yeah.
That's a great place to be.
Oh, Lee, thank you so much for all this. So we're going to finish this up with, if people want to learn more about you, where should they go? And I know you have some classes coming up and other shows. So if they want to know about your projects or read your plays or anything like that, how can we follow Lee Gundersheimer?
Follow me at leegunder.com, my website, which always sounds so, and the classes are at Treefort. You can look up Treefort Productions Project or Treefort here in Sarasota, and do visit that theater for all sorts of reasons. Catherine is doing amazing work there, and the classes will be great fun. They're starting up in just a week. So if you would like to come study, it'd be great to have you.
Great. I will put links to all that right in the show notes, everybody. And Lee, thank you so much for walking down
That's
memory
fun.
lane with me. It's super fun.
Anytime, and I'll send you that play.
Yeah, and if anyone, again, we will be looking for ground level sponsorships. You've been listening to the Page and Stage podcast. All my thanks to this week's guest and to all of you out there for listening. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects in the show notes. If you enjoyed or found value in this podcast, I'd like to ask a quick favor. Leaving a short review or comment helps me out a ton. It tells the algorithmic overlords that people are listening, and it helps other folks discover the show. So if you can post a review over at Apple Podcasts, and I've left a link and easy instructions in the show notes, or leave a comment on this episode on Substack or YouTube, wherever you happen to be listening or watching, I would be incredibly grateful. Plus, I do my absolute best to respond to every comment. Let's get into a fun conversation. I use an incredible online app, riverside.fm, to produce this podcast. If you are interested in creating your own podcast or other audio or video content, I cannot recommend them highly enough. I left a link in the show notes so you can check them out for yourself. Both of my podcasts live over at pageandstage.art. And if you visit, you can even sign up for free to receive every future episode right into your inbox, as well as my weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, inspiration, and encouragement for storytellers of all stripes. Again, that's pageandstage.art. Thank you again for listening. And until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.